Well, this morning we continue in our series on the parables of Jesus. And this morning we find ourselves in Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13. Jesus teaches. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, "Look, here is the bridegroom, come out and meet him." Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." Well, apparently, a fear of being unprepared or caught off guard is a common source of anxiety. After all, many shared, reoccurring dreams revolve around some situation in which we are woefully unprepared. You show up for a final exam at the end of a semester without even realizing you had enrolled in the class. Or you arrive at an important work meeting without realizing you are supposed to give a very important presentation. Or in my case, you show up on a Sunday morning with absolutely nothing prepared. Now, thankfully, these are just dreams, hopefully. However, some, if not all of us, have found ourselves in situations or seasons of life in which we were unprepared or caught off guard. Well, one such season in my life occurred a number of years ago now when I decided to move to Los Angeles. Several months before my departure date, I did a little bit of meager research on the area. I made a couple of calls to acquaintances and skimmed a couple of books, but that was about it. As my departure date neared, I guess I just sort of assumed I'd make the 3-day drive and figure things out when I got there. Well, when I arrived in the greater Los Angeles area, I quickly realized I was woefully unprepared. The biggest obstacle, of course, was that I didn't have near enough money saved up, which I would have realized earlier if I had prepared better. I also quickly realized I definitely should have familiarized myself with the area before throwing myself into the midst of a sprawling, overly crowded urban region, the likes of which I had never lived in before. And remember, this was before smartphones, so I couldn't just plug things in if I got lost. So I should have at least invested in a GPS or something. But after a couple of weeks of sleeping on an acquaintance's couch and racking up credit card debt, I was ready to pack up and move out. The stress that accompanied being completely caught off guard by the challenges of living in such a crazy, expensive environment left me deflated. Now, I somehow ended up staying there, a couple of years. However, had I truly been prepared before moving by saving more money, securing a place to live, familiarizing myself with the area, and maybe scheduling a visit beforehand, I would have experienced a much smoother and more joyful transition. The point is, preparation is crucial. In our scripture lesson for today, Jesus preaches a parable about the importance of being prepared and ready at all times to meet him. This morning, we will explore this parable of the groom and the 10 bridesmaids and explore some of the ways we can ensure we are prepared and not caught off guard by the day of the Lord. So, to begin with, some of Jesus' parables are easier for us to relate to than others. So, for example, we've already covered several agricultural parables. And while farming in first century Palestine was much different than our context, we do still share a common understanding of basic agricultural principles, right? Planting and harvest, reaping and sowing, and so on. And so we can relate to a large extent to such parables. Other parables, however, such as the one we're looking at this morning, are almost completely foreign to us. I mean, we know what a groom and a bride and bridesmaids are, but the situation described in the parable is one we simply cannot relate to, at least not in the Western part of the world. Some countries and other parts of the world today would at least somewhat understand this situation because their traditions still mirror some of the circumstances in the parable, but not for us. So let's try to understand this situation so we better understand the parable. The first thing we need to realize is that wedding celebrations were a much bigger deal in Jesus' context than they are in ours. Now, I know weddings in our context are still quite celebratory in nature. They are typically very expensive, often involve a good number of people, and ideally, at least, still have some component of divine blessing included in the mix. But this pales in comparison to weddings in Jesus' day. In first century Palestine, weddings involved the entire village, not just the couple's family and close friends. Everybody turned out for the ceremony. Everybody participated in escorting the couple to their new home. It was like a tremendous parade without all the floats. And kind of the closest thing I can think of to a modern example of this, number of years ago now, my wife went over to India with her family because her sister was marrying a guy from India. And so they got married here, and then they went over there to get married. I didn't go because I was working and such. But my wife sent me pictures and videos, and when they got there, there was a huge banner with my wife and her whole family on it. And she sent me a video when they arrived in the village. They sat on, I think, kind of the back of a raised bed of a truck with a loudspeaker, and drove around the entire village, it seemed like several times, and everybody came out and, was clapping and shouting and all that. That's kind of a picture of what it was like back in Jesus' day. So, weddings involved the entire village. Now, in addition, in Jesus' time, the wedding celebration lasted a week. When a couple was married, they did not head off to a honeymoon. Rather, they stayed put. And essentially, they were waited on by the village and showered with gifts and graces. They were even addressed as prince and princess during that week of their wedding. And so this likely would have been the most wonderful week of this young couple's lives, and a wonderful week for the entire village. Everyone wanted to be a part of this joyous occasion that was ordained by God. Now, supposedly, part of this celebration involved the groom surprising the bride. The bride would be with her bridesmaids, preparing for her wedding day, awaiting the arrival of the groom. And part of the exciting anticipation was that the bridal party didn't know precisely when the groom would arrive. No one knew precisely which day or at what time the wedding would take place. And so it was kind of a fun surprise on the groom's part. He could come at any day and at any time, even in the middle of the night. And so this gives us kind of an idea of what's happening in the story. Now, a couple of other contextual details to keep in mind. In those days, I guess there was either a generally accepted rule or a law that said no one was allowed to be on the streets after dark without a lit lamp. And so for the foolish bridesmaids, you can see their predicament. Because they were not prepared, because they do not have oil for their lamps, they're not going to be permitted to join in the procession to the wedding ceremony. Their fellow bridesmaids won't share with them because if their lamps go out, they're not going to be able to attend the wedding either. Also, latecomers were not allowed to participate in the ceremony. They didn't allow you to sneak in the back of the sanctuary if you were late. Once that door was shut, that was it. And so these bridesmaids in the story, because they were not prepared, end up missing out on this incredibly joyful, meaningful celebration. And they would possibly regret this for the rest of their lives. Jesus summarizes the point of the parable then by saying, "Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." And so clearly the point of the parable for Jesus' disciples and for us is that we have to be prepared to meet him when he returns. We have to be ready for final judgment. We do not want to be caught off guard lest we miss out on an eternity spent with Christ. Now, when we read a parable like this, if you're like me, the question naturally becomes, okay, how do we do that, right? Because we want to make sure our lamps are filled with oil and we are ready to meet the groom, which of course is a common analogy in the New Testament. Christ is the groom and the church is the bride of Christ. Well, first of all, I think the parable demonstrates clearly that we are in perilous territory if we think it is okay to put off our preparation, right? One of the primary points or thrusts of the situation is the fact that the groom can arrive at any moment, and so the last thing you want is to be caught off guard, because at that point, it's too late. We have to be prepared. So how do we do that? Well, I can really only speak for myself here, but I find it helpful and often sobering to regularly ask myself, to what extent does my life revolve around my faith? To what extent does my life revolve around my faith? Now, I explore this question by evaluating several measures. I look at how much of my time is spent getting to know God. That is, how much meaningful time I spend in prayer and Scripture. I look at my thoughts and my attitudes. I ask things like, okay, am I thinking about things that are pleasing to God? And do I have a charitable and merciful view towards others? Am I growing in patience, kindness, self-control, and so on? And then I also explore my actions. Am I abstaining from sinful behavior? And am I engaging in good works? Do I spend my time and resources in such a way that demonstrate that I love God and I am loving other people the way Christ showed me to? So, to what extent does my life revolve around my faith? Now, when I ask myself this question, and I explore my closeness to God and my thoughts and attitudes and my works, I am then able to evaluate whether or not I am indeed prepared for the arrival of the groom. And to be very honest, typically in at least one of those areas, if not all of them, I don't feel particularly prepared. But when I am willing to commit to evaluating my life of faith, I am able to see those areas where I definitely need to refill the oil. Now, the good news is the groom has grace for us in all of this. The cross, after all, demonstrated God's mercy and forgiveness toward us. But we still have to recognize that God's grace is not cheap. God's grace is not an excuse to remain unprepared. And so I want to ask all of us, and all of us out there, to undertake a challenge this week. A challenge that will, if we take it seriously, help us in our preparation. And so this week, conduct a thorough evaluation of your life of faith. At the end of each day, ask yourself, did I spend time communing with God today? That is, did I take the time to pray and to read Scripture? Or was I too busy with other things, demonstrating that the groom is not really my priority? And then change that aspect of your life. Invest in your relationship with the groom the next day so you're better prepared the next day. And as you are going throughout your day, be mindful of your thoughts and attitudes. If you have scathing or belittling or unholy thoughts about another person, consider whether or not you would want the groom to greet you at that moment. If your attitude toward family or work or the world around you reflects an uncharitable or negative perspective, consider what you might need to change so that you are prepared to meet the groom. And pay close attention to your actions. Be willing to ask yourself, am I doing what I can to benefit others in what I say and in how I treat them? Am I living a generous life? And am I refraining from gossip and self-indulgence and acts unbefitting of a child of God? Would I want the groom to arrive and find me behaving the way that I am? The parable makes it clear that the arrival of Christ will be a surprise, or that death will be a surprise anytime, any way that we meet him. And through the parable, we are issued an invitation as well as a warning. An invitation to prepare ourselves for the most joyous celebration the cosmos will ever know. And yet a warning about the sorrow of being caught off guard. Let all of us then be in active preparation mode as we get ready to meet our groom. And let us take seriously our responsibility as his followers to invite others to be prepared as well.